Hey everyone, Jody here. Over the next week or so, we're bringing you a few of our favorite episodes from the archives. Some people might call them reruns, but we like to call them favorite episodes from the archives. But in the run-up to Memorial Day, we thought we'd bring you some stories about war and the cost of war. We'll be back with new episodes soon, including some conversations about Kellie's brand new book, some more election-related coverage, and of course a bunch of stories that we are excited to talk about. In the meantime, enjoy these episodes, and don't forget to sign up for the newsletter at thisdaypod.com for lots more. Hello, and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, late summer 1944, a group of about 50 naval sailors and officers are facing mutiny charges for refusing to work at a California port where they were being asked to load munitions. Now, this moment in the last week of August, first week of September, is happening in the context of something that had happened about a month earlier, a massive explosion at this munitions depot that had killed 320 men in the Navy and some civilians. 220 of those men were black. And now the sailors, about a month later, were being asked to basically do the same sort of work that led to that disaster, loading munitions under unsafe conditions. And many of them refused, and many of them were then court-martialed. So that is the moment that we're in right now, a work stoppage, threat of mutiny, a controversial trial on the horizon. So let's get into that, and also the details of this explosion, which are absolutely wild. And also, I guess I should say there's also a Thurgood Marshall element to this story as well. So there's a lot going on here, really fascinating. Here to discuss, as always, are Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
I should say, I love all of our episodes equally. They're like my children, you know. I only have one child, but I have many episodes. But yeah, I love them all equally. But there are some that are just like, whoa, you know, and they catch me, and they and you see just elements and elements. And I mean, you know, this one is mostly like, whoa, that's depressing. Whoa, that's depressing. Whoa, that's depressing. But this is really one of those that is just full of so many layers. And one thing to clarify before we get into the layers is this port is Port Chicago. It is in California, right, folks? So we're going to refer to Port Chicago. It is not in Chicago. It is in California. It's like there's more names out there, Navy. Like you can't just can't just come up with a different name. And you know, it's sort of in the Bay Area. So you know, but anyway, we're going to refer to Port Chicago. It's going to be California. It is what it is. Should we start with this explosion in late July that obviously sort of sets up this this showdown and this work stoppage? The details there, as I said, are just incredible.
I mean, I was baffled by this story because there were so many opportunities where they could have righted a wrong, and they just don't do it. So this massive explosion that took place that takes the life of 320 people could have all been avoided. The soldiers had been saying that, you know, this is not safe. The conditions are not safe. Not everybody was equipped to do this kind of work. They were still pushed to do this work. And when they had this massive explosion and hundreds of people die, immediately after that, instead of trying to figure out, hey, what went wrong so we don't have this happen again, they send some of the same soldiers from this group to say, hey, we need you to load munitions again. And, you know, the fear that this explosion could happen all over again is very, very close on the hearts and minds of these soldiers. And so they are essentially refusing to do this work until changes are made, until they realize, you know, how this explosion happened, until it's safe for them to conduct this. They were, you know, having soldiers perform this work that had no idea what they were doing, that were not equipped to work this kind of machinery. And it really reaches a head when a group of soldiers basically refuse to take part. It's about 50 men specifically that say, no matter what, we are not going to load munitions. It is not safe. We refuse. And it was almost safer for them to refuse than it was for them to participate in this act.
And to put that fear into context, we should talk about the explosion itself. It happens late at night. It's after 10 p.m. on July 17th. And it's actually two explosions. They're just a few seconds apart. But the the force of the explosion is 5 kilotons of TNT. So that's the magnitude of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. It's not nuclear in that way.
Repeat that?
Yeah, I mean, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima has this same force. It's not nuclear power, but the rest of it is all the same. And you've seen the pictures from Hiroshima, the flattening effect. When we say that 320 people were killed, they were killed instantly because that area was obliterated by this force. And the people who survived, the people who weren't there, are then put into action to clean up afterwards. And they're picking through munitions and broken parts of ships and body parts. It's an explosion that's felt 40 miles away. It's just enormous. And so the people that Kellie is talking about have been traumatized by this event. These were their friends. These were their coworkers. These were men who were in their same units, and they all die in this accident. And now these men are being asked to do the same. And it's different than being asked to like go charge that hill that your compatriots just charged. They're not being protected by their own government to do this work in a safe way. So there's a lot of fear, a lot of trauma, and a lot of resentment that more hasn't been done to make this safe.
And we should also say that, like, even before the explosion, morale is low. And it's particularly low because Black soldiers are not given special ratings. They're not given awards. They're not given promotions. So if you know that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, you are not going to get promoted, it's going to lead to this overall sort of apathetic attitude. You know, a lot of these soldiers did not have the same sort of accommodations that their white peers had. There were no recreational facilities. There was no military transport to take them into Oakland or San Francisco. That's a huge deal for soldiers to be able to get away from work, to be able to go have fun or have dinner or whatever. You are essentially trapped on this base, and there's no way for you to elevate yourself or promote yourself out of that rank or out of that space. And so it leads to a lot of apathy.
And to make matters even worse, when Congress gets involved and starts responding to this disaster, they grant survivors leave to white survivors, but not Black survivors. When it comes to payments to beneficiaries, that's normally set at $5,000. But when a senator from Mississippi hears that it's mostly Black beneficiaries, then he's like, oh, no. We're not giving $5,000. We'll give $2,000. And Congress ultimately settles on $3,000. And so there has been just this repeated message that you as Black soldiers are just not worth much to us.
Yeah. And white soldiers too, because they only gave them $3,000 too. I mean, everybody should have got $5,000, which is still not a lot of money, but everyone gets $3,000.
Yeah, that's sort of the interesting thing here is they were going to give $5,000. John Rankin of Mississippi heard about this, heard that most of the beneficiaries were going to be Black, raises a stink, demands it gets lowered to $2,000. They settle on $3,000, but for everyone. And so everyone gets screwed because of John Rankin's racism. By the way, if you want a remarkable tour of racism and awful politics, go look at John Rankin's track record. It's remarkable. God. And this objecting to this is, unfortunately,
par for the course. He's bleak.
An afterthought in terms of his impact in this era. Okay, so that sets up this sort of larger context of how we get from this tragic incident, people feeling betrayed by their employer and their government. And then, it's, again, about a month later, they're basically like, well, we still have a job to do. Come out here to this yard and basically, like, go back to doing the exact same activity, loading munitions that you were doing or that your people who you knew had died doing just earlier. So it is to me no surprise necessarily that people started to refuse, especially because of the 50 men who refused to work, 2 were mess cooks and they had never handled munitions before. One had a nervous condition and was worried that, they would not be able to kind of load munitions.
Right.
Another person had a broken wrist and was in a cast, So, I mean, it's just kind of like, in addition to being insensitive.
One person was underweight. That means they were too small to do this work?
Yeah. It is an era of an interesting labor moment. And so do you think of this as kind of a work stoppage in this way?
I see it as like military negligence. I see it as an institutional failing based on institutional racism. When these 50 men pretty much get court-martialed, and their military career is about to be over. And they send in special counsel. Thurgood Marshall, before Brown v. Board, Thurgood Marshall comes onto the scene to defend these Black soldiers who really are facing prison time because of this. Not just getting kicked out of the military, but they are going to be court-martialed and have to serve real time, up to 15-year sentences. I mean, that's no small thing. And you get to see just how little Black soldiers are valued in this moment. Because when it does go to trial and they deliberate for less than 90 minutes, about 80 minutes, and they convict all 50 defendants of mutiny, including the man with the broken wrist and the two others who had never even loaded ammunition before for medical reasons. All of them were sentenced to 15-year sentences. That's incredible.
And it really points to how this, which I do think of, Jody, as a work stoppage. I mean, this is an era of wildcat strikes. This is an era of labor activism to push back against racism, something that A. Philip Randolph does a lot of in the early 1940s. But when a strike gets busted, you might lose your job, but you're not going to end up facing a court-martial for mutiny, a death penalty crime, or wind up in jail for 15 years. And I think that is, it's a work stoppage, but it's in such a different context. Yeah. And so it has such different consequences.
And, we should say that they were imprisoned. 47 of the 50 were released in January of 46, so they don't serve out the full 15 years. Many of them, though, get sent back into the war, and a number of them are told, okay, go finish your enlistment in the Pacific. Quite remarkable. Thoughts on Thurgood Marshall? I mean, I mentioned at the beginning that, there are stunning details here, but very few kind of like silver linings or parts of it that sort of make you feel, I mean, I suppose if this is an early chapter in Thurgood Marshall's career is one place to look for an interesting wrinkle.
Yeah. I mean, he's not successful, he does not win this case. That doesn't make it any less important. But I definitely think that this starts the path, especially with his role in the NAACP, is him plowing towards these high-profile cases in the hopes that there will be a breakthrough. And there does. There's a major breakthrough about 10 years later with Brown v. Board. It's huge. It's massive, which ends school segregation in the United States. But this particular case, he was not able to help these men. It's
a reminder Thurgood Marshall lost a lot before he won. And I think also a reminder, and Marshall plays a role in some of these stories, that the military, which is often held up as one of the least racist institutions in American government, that it's the one space where like integration happens and where there's more equality, is a pretty bleak place during World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this incident is certainly part of, this was very high profile at the time. It sort of cast an eye on race and the Navy. There were a number of other race-related protests in 44, 45, and, in the beginning of 1946 is when the Navy begins to desegregate its forces. Now, I don't know if that was necessarily because of this pressure. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons for desegregation within the military, but it's certainly in the context of this that we can see desegregation, as you referred to.
And each branch is different too. So what segregation looks like in the Air Force is completely different than in the Army or the Marines or the Navy. The Army has sort of had a much stronger reputation for integration, but the Air Force and the Navy and the Marines, not so much.
In response to the incident in 1945, the Navy's response was that they limited the number of blacks working at ammunition depots to no more than 30% of the workforce. That's their solution.
That's their solution. Okay,
hire
we'll
more
throw
white
some
people.
more white guys at it. Because it's still dangerous. But we'll put some more of our soldiers in the stake. Wow, that's trash.
Yeah. If we disperse our black workers, then we won't have black labor problems.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Is this a story Nathaniel knew?
Yeah, it is. Of course.
Anything
military history, he definitely knew this history. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So this story does, I think, fade in many ways into memory, as I think like most stories kind of that aren't, I don't know, of this era. A lot of them just get subsumed by the end of the war and so forth. But it really does seem to fade, and it's not until many years later. I mean, so in 1999, President Clinton pardons Freddie Meeks, who was one of, as far as people could tell, one of only 3 of the 50 convicted sailors who was alive at the time. But then it's really not until, like a couple years ago that there's like any sort of formal apology or a restitution or anything.
Yeah. It's not until June of 2019 that U.S. Representative Mark DeShulner basically puts forth a resolution recognizing the victims of the explosion and officially exonerates the 50 men court-martialed by the Navy. So now there's a national memorial to the victims at the site. But we've also talked about this on the podcast before, that there are these big moments in which all you get is a plaque. There's no real reparations. There's just an acknowledgement or some sort of postmark, and that's about it.
Yeah. Last year there's a park. So there's probably a plaque in that park, but there's a park that is named after, it's named after Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, and the Port Chicago 50 in the East Bay. That sort of marks the spot. It's a regional park, the first named after a black person in that county. But yeah, there you have it. All right, that brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
It was the survivors of this terrible tragedy who now found themselves without any explanations of what would be done about it to keep it from happening again.
When they were marching one day, they knew that if they went in one direction, they'd be going to ships to load them. They knew if they went in another direction, they wouldn't be.
At that point, their commanding officer gave the order, column left. And everybody stopped.
They didn't move.
Hey, it's Jody. Did you know that Radiotopia has a reality dating podcast? It is called Hang Up, and it's kind of like a queer cross between The Bachelor and Love is Blind. Each week, the star goes on phone dates with the callers, and then one caller is eliminated week by week. They do not see each other. Here's a taste of Hang Up.
Our star Timo is 41 years old and recently divorced.
I haven't been on a single date in 18 months.
But now, they're looking for someone special.
And really hot sex. Really hot public sex.
So we set them up with 6 callers to date exclusively over the phone.
I feel like I could talk to you for hours.
Now, at the end of all this, the last caller standing can choose the star back as their soulmate and go on an all-expenses-paid vacation together, or choose a cash prize instead. Hang Up is hosted by Zakiya Gibbons, one of my favorite people at Radiotopia, and not for nothing, the artwork for this new season is incredible. So, check it all out. It is like nothing else being done in podcasting right now. Season 2 of Hang Up, out now on your favorite podcast platform.
Radiotopia.